Good afternoon. I'm Marianne Wilson, editor of Chain Store Age, and I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Learn How to Turn Your Store into a Destination, which is being sponsored by Sevan Multi-Site Solutions. Before we start, I want to make some brief housekeeping points. Please feel free to use the Q&A function to send questions throughout the presentation. It's on the left side of your screen, down below the presenter headshots. We'll field as many questions as we can at the end of the formal presentation. If we don't have time to answer all of the questions, our sponsors will follow up by email after the webinar ends. Also, you can use the section down on the left if you have any technical questions during the webinar, and you'll get a direct reply from our webinar producer. Finally, if you want to review this webinar later or share it with a colleague, a replay will be available on the Chain Store Age site within about 2 hours of our conclusion today, and it will remain available for several months going forward. Okay, that does it with the housekeeping. Let's get on with today's webinar. I'm going to hand things over to David Hendrix, who is the Chief Commercial Officer at Sevan. David?
Thank you, Marianne. Greatly appreciate everybody's time today and the opportunity to speak to everybody for the next hour. I'm going to first allow Mark Kinnare, our Senior Vice President of Operations, to introduce himself, and then we'll get right into the presentation.
Hi, thanks, David. Good afternoon, and as the case may be, good morning to a few of you on the West Coast. Happy Tuesday. My name is Mark Kinnare. As David said, I'm the SVP of Operations at Sevan. My job essentially is to help our clients design, create, and then implement programs that help them deploy their capital. And excited today to be talking to you specifically about what we're seeing in the marketplace and how we're doing that for clients in the C-store in the fuel pump and take space. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Mark. And again, David Hendrix, Chief Commercial Officer with Sevan. Thrilled with the opportunity to speak to you today. Sevan has a really unique opportunity and really offering and capability within the chain store area or arena. We've got the pleasure and the opportunity and really the background working with a number of large marquee style brands that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. And really what sets us apart and what allows us to have some of the expertise and understanding of what we'll talk about today is really our style and approach around really being turnkey and solution oriented that allows us to collect an immense amount of data, the experience and understanding of how to approach different remodels, rollouts, refreshes, new builds, et cetera. And then ultimately share those ideas with our customer base just to make sure that we're thinking about everything and looking at every avenue to ultimately have a really good return on the money being spent and the investment of what these new ideas, trends, and thought process ultimately is. And at the end of the day, our goal as Sevan is really just to create speed and scale for you, our customers. And we've got a proven track record of doing that over the past decade. And we really look forward to having that opportunity with not only these customers, but future customers in the future. And what we'll focus on today from a talk track or thought process standpoint is encapsulated here in the agenda. But we'll start with what does capital improvements look like and what trends are existing in this space today with a number of different ideas. So Mark is going to use some of his expertise and experience and really what Sevan has started to roll out or do with a number of different brands. And what we're seeing in the industry. And then we'll talk about some future trends of really what's coming down the pipe from a customer experience standpoint, ultimately what they're asking for, looking for, and ultimately demanding to ensure that traffic continues and there's a return on that spend and thought process. We'll also talk about some case studies of where we've seen some success in some of these capital improvements and or trends. And then we'll have a 5-10 minute conversation just more in depth on what Sevan does, how we help, where we create value, and then we'll leave 5 to 10 minutes at the end of this conversation just for some question and answer. If we do run out of time on any portion of the Q&A, we will make sure that we follow up with you. So feel free to ask as many questions as you want. We want to be a resource for you and ultimately help you in any and every way we can. So At this point, I will turn it back over to Mr. Kinnare.
Thanks, David. Before we get started, I thought we'd take a minute or so to kind of level set to where we were pre-COVID, what we saw during COVID, and where we see coming out of the pandemic, where the trends are, where a lot of the focus and attention in the industry is right now on a kind of looking forward, go forward basis, looking out 3 to 5 years, and then out. We'll end by talking about kind of future trends out past 5 years to 10 years in terms of some of the conversations that we're participating in and having with clients right now as they start to envision what that might look like. We're going to talk about, as David said, 5 kind of big buckets of areas in this space where people are investing capital today to get the returns that they're pretty confident they're going to be able to attain and achieve. And they're around beverages and around food service, around technology and the digital experience is kind of a combined topic. And then about EV charging, which is everybody's hot button topic these days. And then some of the conversations we're having recently with folks around ancillary things like seating and recreational areas, spaces that some of our clients are talking about creating as we continue to move to a different model, different footprint going forward, particularly around EV. So those 5 buckets. The second thing I wanted to touch on that kind of helps us level set is where are we as an industry right now? It's worth noting on some of these statistics on this slide that there's 150,000 C-stores as of 2021 in the United States. Bottom right-hand statistic, I think, is another important statistic. The 35% of all brick and mortar in the retail, the broader retail sector are C-stores. It's a big footprint across the entire United States, generating around $700 billion a year in sales, with a worldwide global market capitalization of close to $2 trillion. The 2 other statistics on there that I think are really worth mentioning are probably more applicable in terms of where we're at as an industry, and what really matters is that the industry is projecting about a 5% annualized growth rate over the next 5 years based on current trends. Right now, people are spending about a little over 3 minutes in terms of a customer engaged experience on site when they're on your property. And trends indicate that as the modeling of EV starts to take it and grab hold going forward, that number is only going to continue to increase. So important things to level set against. The slide that we've got, this one slide here about on the left-hand side, the before and after version, once we start talking about beverage, I thought it was just a fun thing to remind ourselves of where we were and where we are now. I was reflecting back and thinking 25 years ago, on my way to work every day, I'd stop at my local convenience store to get a cup of coffee. And at the time, my only option was that one Bunn coffee maker that had 2 pots. One that had just been freshly brewed and one sitting on top in the warmer. And my choice was usually a regular coffee or a decaf. And shortly after that, there was a second Bunn coffee maker that was introduced that had French vanilla. And thinking that we'd struck gold, that we suddenly had another option. And think back that was 20 years or so ago, and fast forward to today. And as everyone knows, we see it day in, day out, all the kind of changes that have taken place in that piece of your store in terms of all the different offerings that are available and that are out there for people right now with all sorts of variety and choice. And that's just an amazing thing that we can look and reflect back on, because we take it so much for granted today that we have this myriad of choices. In the beverage piece of this, where we see a lot of capital investment right now is people thinking through the relationship between hot beverages, prepared beverages, cold beverages, and where the trends are and what direction things are heading in, to continue to kind of create that destination effect that we're looking for, where people are not just making an impulse buy, but they're intentionally and purposely stopping at the C-store in their neighborhood on their way somewhere to get a hot beverage, a cold beverage, a prepared beverage. So the trend is strong. It's continuing down that road as we're moving forward. One thing of note in today's marketplace, what we're seeing, and it extends a little bit beyond C-stores, is that, an example, a client of ours, Starbucks, has come out recently and said that because of the changes that they've seen in the consumer buying behavior during COVID, they're now having to rethink how their food and beverage preparation area operates, because so many of their customers are ordering cold beverages now. So we do see a trend and an opportunity as we watch consumer behavior and consumer preferences change, that people are starting to look more towards that ability to get that kind of customized cold drink prepared for them, as to just kind of a grab and go, grab a cup of coffee, and they're out the door. And that trend is extending beyond just kind of that Starbucks customer experience, but other coffee retailers and C-stores are starting to think about and contemplate what those changes look like in terms of what they need to be thinking about now in terms of the dedication of space, not only in the preparation of it, but in terms of how many lineal feet, for instance, that they have to allow when we're talking to our space planners, and thinking about what that looks like in the short term. But that trend is strong and continuing in that direction. We get over to food service, which is kind of that second bucket of capital expense. Again, kind of what was it like 10, 20 years ago? What's it like today? 10, 20 years ago, there was a hot dog roller. Hopefully it was keeping the hot dogs warm. There was some variety, hopefully, of one or two choices there. And we fast forward to today and kind of look at where we are today in terms of the investment people are making and the return they're getting by putting a lot of focus energy around prepared foods. We have some stats in that food service sector that kind of give you a relative comparison in terms of total dollars spent in the C-store space today for prepared foods relative to prepared beverages, whether it be hot or cold. But again, the one thing to point out, even though the prepared food number tends to dwarf some of the dispensed and prepared beverages, it's important to note, though, that trend line is kind of shifting a little bit and kind of going more towards that customer that's now looking for a variety and the ability to kind of customize a drink. And it's about the experience of that they're getting from that ability to kind of mix and match and kind of create their own concoction, if you will. In the food service space, we've got, when we're working with our clients and talking about kind of space planning in terms of laying out what the food offering might look like today, a lot of times what we're talking to customers, that we're kind of bucketing things into three categories. We've got basic food offerings, which are the traditional things that you'd expect, which we've got listed there. Things like grab and go type of things, hot dogs, limited on-site or no site prep of food at all, and some other nominal made-to-order options, but really kind of bare bones, kind of basic. And then we have two other categories that we're kind of breaking things into. Does the C-store operator want to have kind of a premium offering, a step above, with more of an offering of prepared foods, either off-site or on-site, but to have a nominal amount of space dedicated to that? Or do they really want to kind of invest fully in that space as a capital expenditure to try to get that return off of what they're calling and we're calling kind of that super premium category? And so important from a planning and go forward thinking standpoint to really try to decide what is it I'm trying to achieve here, which allows us to continue to work with you as the client to really decide how much space do we need to dedicate, what is the signing going to look like that goes along with that, where's the emphasis and the focus going to be. Helps tremendously to kind of go in and have an idea in mind, a pretty good idea in mind in terms of how much capital you want to deploy, what's the expected return going to look like, based on how you want to go in that one particular area as it relates to prepared foods. In the food service category, a couple statistics probably worth mentioning. $340,000 of average food sales per store, 22 versus looking at 2021 numbers. The industry is saying that there's a better than a 20% growth in sales. So from a trend line from 2020, if we work from there and we project out 3 to 5 years beyond where we're at right now, they're looking at continued single high-digit growth, compounding year over year. And the conversations we're having with clients in terms of how to plan space for that and try to accommodate for that, most clients are tending to err more cautiously on, like, I need to accommodate and think about not just where we are now, but particularly what we can anticipate or expect based on industry trends in the next 3 to 5 years. Another couple of important things to talk about. There is a statistic that we uncovered, which kind of underscores what we're kind of suspect. Wawa was rated, which nobody was surprised by, but as the top ranked food service destination recently. But it was the category that they were trying to measure was not just the food, but also location and service. So they were taking those three things into consideration in the questions when they were doing their polling for people. But the interesting thing that came out of that was that as an industry, not just specific to one particular C-store operator, but as an industry, that C-store as a space now ranks ahead of QSRs in the United States for overall satisfaction when you're measuring on those three points. First time that that's happened where C-stores have ranked ahead of QSRs, which I think is an important trend for people to pay attention to because the trend line goes in that direction, and it's something that people can begin to start thinking about leveraging from a consumer perception standpoint. Another important statistic on there is that 59% of the folks said that they will consider purchasing a meal from a C-store when stopping for fast food. So in terms of making a destination choice and not an impulse buy, the more than half of the people polled said that they now consider a C-store to be at or above QSR and will consider that as a destination stop in their buying decisions. Again, another important consideration, kind of underscoring and justifying the capital expenditure to be able to get the desired ROI. A few other things of note while we're in the food service space, and they have to do with opportunity. The trend in America when we're polling people about their health preferences and their food choices that they're making are talking about the fact that they're not only trying to eat healthier, but they actually feel that they're actually making progress in that area. So it's not just talk the talk, but it's also now they're saying they're walking the walk more so than they were in previous years. Again, another trend kind of coming out of COVID. So that creates opportunity, especially when we're talking in space planning, some of these spaces, to think about things like salads, fruits, vegetables, healthy nuts, yogurt, health snacks, things like that, to be able to planning adequate space so that consumers have multiple options when making those kind of conscious decisions. A few other things that are worth noting is that there's an uptick in when we're talking about options in the breakfast and the lunch space, particularly when it relates to sandwiches, burritos, things like that. So building that kind of thinking in as well in terms of a different choice from a kind of a grab and go standpoint at lunchtime. A few other things is that a few C-store operators have had great success, like Casey's, we all know, is one of the highest ranked pizzas in the country. But Casey's has gotten to the point right now where just in one small segment, they've been able to generate 25% of their total food sales with one product that they've decided they're going to focus on and be great at. And they are. In fact, last night when I was traveling here into Chicago, I stopped at a Casey's on my way to my hotel and grabbed a pizza on my way back to the hotel room. And it was, as always, it was delicious. Kind of changing a little bit and getting away from beverage and food right now and getting into that third bucket of that we're talking about in terms of where people are contemplating making capital expenditures right now is in the area of technology and we'll call it digital experience. A lot of conversations taking place about things like self-checkout in the marketplace right now. Consumers, when they're being polled, will tell you that because of their years of experience in self-checkout in the grocery space, places like Home Depot, that they've gotten accustomed and they trust the process of self-checkout. So we're having conversations now about how do retailers extend that beyond maybe that traditional experience in grocery places like Home Depot and into other environments as well. Starting to have a lot of those conversations with clients in the C-store space about deploying that. A lot of the conversation, from our understanding, is on the client side. It has to do with issues regarding labor efficiency, labor modeling, shortage of labor in the marketplace, and trying to find ways to leverage technology to be able to help them solve another problem, which in this particular instance has to do with labor. So a lot of folks thinking about and starting to plan for putting in some type of self-checkout near the traditional area where at the entrance exit to the store, near the existing checkout areas, the traditional checkout areas that we're all accustomed to seeing. Few other things in this space that people are thinking at and looking at right now. There's been a lot of conversation around some of this Amazon technology that Amazon has deployed and is licensing to some folks right now in the space. Our experience to date right now is that we're at our recommendation to clients is to be kind of cautious and careful, thinking that through. It's an expensive proposition from a capital deployment standpoint. The jury's still out in terms of whether or not consumers and customers are entirely willing and able at this point to shop in that manner in terms of trying to get that extra value and utility out of that technology and leveraging it. We haven't quite seen the kind of overwhelming evidence to suggest that the cost, the upfront costs, are justified by gaining anything in terms of efficiency or a better customer experience. So our recommendation there is that people tread carefully in that space. We do have some subject matter experts at Sevan that can speak to that. If anybody is thinking about that or would like a different viewpoint or maybe a different perspective, we'd be more than happy to share that with anyone who has interest in having that conversation. Few other things that we're seeing that are starting to become pretty widespread, and most of you or some of you may have already deployed, are contactless payment. That's a result of COVID, but seems to be sticky in terms of it's a customer preference. It's the way people are used to and accustomed to shopping now. They trust it, and by and large, the consumer polling indicates that they're perfectly fine with that method of payment and doing that on a go-forward basis. It wasn't just a pandemic one and done type of experience. It's sticky and they're comfortable with it. There are other mobile checkouts in terms of shop, scan, and pay. Some of you may know or do it yourself, but you've other convenience store retailers, some of the bigger ones, have started to deploy that in terms of on their app and the ability to scan and self-check out the products and check out themselves. I think right now as the technology continues to evolve, what we're hearing is that customers are not as willing to engage in that type of a buying as they are as maybe just doing contactless payment. But it is kind of trending in that direction that it's a valuable way for you from a retailer operator standpoint to gather additional data. So there's a lot of focus in there that the payoff and the benefit to you is significant, as we all tend to kind of go through the growing pains of getting the technology to work better, more efficiently, and as consumers continue to gain trust in that and kind of create that win-win from the consumer side and from the operator side in terms of what you can and how you can leverage the data that you collect as consumers use that app more and more frequently. I think we have a poll at this point, David, which if I see it right, the question is which capital improvement initiative most interests you right now, either in the categories that we're talking about today or perhaps in a different space, but what are the things that most interest you? We've got three options up there from our conversation today about beverages, food service, and digital upgrades. And while you're taking a minute to respond to that, wanted to spend a minute or two talking about the whole idea of, in this technology area of capital investment, is not to talk about the whole idea of retail media infrastructure. And this is becoming increasingly important to you as an operator, but also to the companies that want to reach your customer. So we're seeing a lot of interest in trying to leverage the idea of how do you not only sell space to companies that want to reach your customer. But then once we capture the data on the consumer and the customer side, how do we then sell and then leverage that data that you're collecting with those companies as they continue to kind of fine tune the messaging that they're trying to convey to the consumer and to your consumer. So typical kind of conversations revolve around the idea of out at the pumps in terms of how to communicate with the customers internally inside the store. There are opportunities that you can leverage to be able to engage the consumer and capture data at the same time, and then leverage that data on a go-forward basis. On the delivery side of things, some interesting things that are taking place there. We don't have enough evidence at this point from our own experience, but a lot of conversation circles around kind of partnering around with some of these super fast delivery services that are now available. We're kind of keeping a close eye on a Chicago-based company called Food Rocket that just recently partnered with Circle K that is created a fulfillment center where people using the C-Store Operators app can go online, buy a select group of products that are available, and it's then the Food Rocket's responsibility to do the fulfillment, do the picking, and do the fulfillment. And talking about in a lot of urban markets being able to get to the consumer and deliver the merchandise, deliver the product within 15 minutes. But it seems to be a trend that's accelerating as another venue and another way for you to add revenue dollars in by partnering strategically with someone like a Food Rocket or any of the other delivery options that are out there in terms of partnering up with folks like DoorDash, Uber Eats, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that ties back into the whole idea of leveraging the app is using your customer, is the idea of customer loyalty. We're seeing a lot of customers and clients that want to have a conversation about how to continue to leverage their app to generate that sense of destination and intentional shopping, going back to the ideas of food, beverage, and becoming a preferred destination as people are making a food decision, a drink decision, and leveraging that app by offering rewards and incentives for people to continue to kind of build that habit of stopping on a regular basis at the C-stores. The next bucket of capital investment area is the hot topic these days, which is all around EV. I think the thing of note and worth mentioning right now is that from a trend standpoint, there was a lot of early talk about EV 18, 24 months ago, and a lot of people that were curious reaching out to us, asking if we were in that space, what our experience was to date, and really asking us if we could provide any counsel or general direction, things to be thinking about as time went by. Fast forward to the last 9 to 12 months, there's been a significant amount of increased interest in not only gaining knowledge about EV and what the people's options are, but actually folks that are now planning and putting money into their capital budget to begin to roll out EV. And then we come to today, and I can say in the last 6 months, the conversations have accelerated 5 or 10-fold, and we're talking about it almost on a daily basis these days, and beginning to implement and install EVs across the United States and also over in the UK, where we have a footprint as well. So the conversations are accelerating. Capital is being set aside and starting to become invested in this space. And obviously, the trends are that it's going to continue to accelerate, especially given the investment and support that the federal government has put into this right now, and really drawn a lot of people's attention into accelerating in this space as quickly as possible, with a lot of incentives and an awful lot of federal money that's becoming available right now. We are deploying EV stations, particularly level 2 and level 3 chargers in a lot of C-stores across the country right now. The thinking on a go-forward basis is what will that look like 3 to 5 years from now? So the monies that are being deployed right now, I think for the most part, are a response to we need to have a presence. We need to do this. We can start to calculate a return on investment. And in addition to that, we need to be then thinking even further out, because this is very quickly evolving. The technology is evolving quickly. The consumers are beginning to kind of demand that there be EV charging in their community, at their place of work, where they live, where they shop. And so a lot of response right now is that the consumer demand is there, and we need to react to it, and we need to react to it thoughtfully, but also quickly. We'd be more than happy to share our experience to date and some of our thinking and some of the things that we're seeing and how we might be able to help for anybody that's contemplating at this point, what next steps are in their journey down that path as it relates to EV. The last bucket of thing that we want to talk about in terms of capital deployment that we're hearing today is when people are starting to take a little bit longer view now that's going out more than a year or two out, and thinking about what that store of the future might look like in this space, particularly with the trends in EV. There are other ancillary things that people are starting to think about when they're looking at greenfield development, for example, in terms of how much land do I need to be able to achieve what I'm trying to do, to be able to provide a really robust solution in the marketplace now, but still be relevant 3 to 5 years from now. People are looking at ancillary uses because dwell times are going to start to increase the more people are on site, whether it be for 15 or 20 or 30 or 45 minutes potentially. And the conversations start to drift now these days towards thinking about seating, outdoor seating, creating a space where people can charge all of their iPhones, their iPads, et cetera, faster and faster Wi-Fi, and creating even recreational spaces as people are increasing with dwell times. So what does that look like? How much space do we need to dedicate for that? What type of investment does that entail to be able to kind of make this more, as we shift more towards an experiential type of thing for folks in your customer, as opposed to just where they today maybe are thinking about expediency. How do I get in, get what I need, fill up my car, grab a cup of coffee and get out? Their ability and their willingness to stay longer and dwell longer if there's a reason for them to. So a lot of that kind of is going into folks' strategic thinking these days. And as it relates to future trends, in terms of where do we see this accelerating and going, especially once we get out beyond that 5-year horizon, people are thinking now about a variety of different solutions that sometimes are not going to involve EV. They're just looking at, in terms of urban market, urban redevelopment. We have clients that are talking about us helping them find and develop space in urban cores and urban markets where they're just looking for creating a C-store walk-up experience with the types of investments that we've talked in the last 15, 20 minutes about. We just recently came across, some information, some good articles about people like Casey's are opening up non-fuel spaces with a focus around universities. So a lot of, I wouldn't call them one-offs, but people are looking at where can they potentially take this idea of creating this C-store that has a different focus and emphasis than a traditional C-store, making the requisite investments in those and putting them into different environments and different markets, places that they maybe historically weren't really focused on or putting a lot of time, effort, and energy into. The other trend that we're seeing that's worth mentioning is a few folks are starting to think about putting in drive-ups in their C-stores and having a dedicated space in the prepared food section that's about how do we move food expeditiously through a drive-through experience. So even from a store planning and space planning standpoint, looking at ways that they can design and lay out their stores more efficiently in another way to serve their customer, besides traditional in-the-store shopping versus curbside pickup, besides the way they're making the purchase, but creating that space where they can come through the drive-through and kind of leverage and take advantage of the trend that is sticky that's coming out of post-COVID, where 75 to 80% of traditional sales that might have been 10 to 15 years ago in restaurant as opposed to drive-through, it's just flipped itself on its head, and now it's 75 to 80% of the sales are coming through the drive-through. So how to leverage that in the C-store space? Interesting conversations we're having with folks, early conversations, but some people are beginning to deploy that strategy. I think we have one other poll question before I start to hand it back over to David. When do you expect to add EV charging to your footprint? If you are thinking about it, if you're considering it, gave you a couple different horizons, just kind of came up with some arbitrary times, 6 months, 18 months, 36 months. It's always good to gather this kind of information because it kind of helps us understand where clients are prioritizing their capital spend and the things that they're thinking about. So if you have just a minute, if you could answer that question, we'd appreciate that. And as I start to transition over to David, I was thinking about kind of summarize things, which is really try to what's the one thing that we learn day in, day out working with our clients. And the one thing that we see is that if clients, and we can't emphasize this enough, if our clients work diligently on the front end in terms of once they've made them decisions to deploy capital, is to set themselves up to be successful. And we see this time and time and time again and get asked this question, how do we do that? And what advice do we have to give to people? We tell people all the time that details matter. They really do matter, whether they're big or they're small. The devil's in the details. Delays are expensive, and delays can sometimes derail projects entirely. And the question then becomes, how do we avoid those kinds of delays? How do we avoid budget overruns? How do we tap into the expertise in the marketplace of people who have done this before, know how to do this, can do this at scale, and can mitigate and take risk out of any of these projects that you're contemplating? The answer is quite simply, from my perspective, is that if you engage the right people early, the right professionals early, get advice that you can trust from a strategic partner, and then find a single source that can help you not only understand what do I have right now, buy into this is what you're trying to accomplish, help develop the roadmap. How do we get from where we are now to where we want to go? How do we mitigate the risk along the way? And how do we control our costs? And how do we control the schedule so that we can actually get the project accomplished? Is something that we pride ourselves on as a company. We do it day in, day out. We consider ourselves subject matter experts par excellence in the C-store subsector, and would love the opportunity to share that experience and tell you those stories and hopefully share in your successes on a go-forward basis. With that, David, I think I'll turn that back over to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Greatly appreciate the insight and some of the things you discussed. I wanted to spend just a few minutes before we go into the Q&A just to share a little more background on who Sevan is and why we've got some of the expertise and knowledge that Mark really spoke about. So what you see on the slide here is really just some stats. The cool thing about Sevan is in our existence, we really touch roughly 14,000 sites on an annual basis. And what we do with that is we're able to gather data, really understand trends, and more importantly, we're able to provide advice. So whatever you all are encountering, what you're interacting with, what you're facing, whether that's a challenge, an opportunity, or a thought, We've probably experienced it before. If we haven't, we've got enough understanding and capability to be able to approach that in a very pragmatic and collaborative way to make sure that you'll ultimately get that return that you're really looking for. Nobody remodels, refreshes, spends money just for the heck of it. There's always a CFO in the background saying, "Hey, what's the return here? What are we going to get out of this?" Whether it's a raw margin or intrinsic value, et cetera. But again, the beauty of Sevan is we've experienced a lot of things. We're constantly learning. We're using those data points that we collect to make sure that the end result is really centered around creating value for you, our customers. And we're nimble enough, and then again, have that expertise based on just what we see and do every single day, that we really can provide some of the advice that's needed to ensure that program, project, or rollout gets to the end result or ribbon cutting as fast and as efficiently as possible. So when we think about how Sevan can help with that vast experience, knowledge base, and understanding, really we like to think of ourselves as an extension of you and your team, ultimately multiply the effects. The coolest thing that we hear on a regular basis is when we're on a job site or interacting with whether it's vendors or internal colleagues for some of our customers, that they didn't even realize that they were talking to a Sevan employee versus a C-store chain. And that really, again, just shows to our adaptability and understanding. But what we really do is we've got the opportunity to provide a solution that allows for a really expeditious and efficient approach and ultimately an ending outcome. So clearly, when we're starting to approach these things and look at these things, understanding what currently exists is always important. Sometimes there's as-built drawings, sometimes there's not. Sometimes there's an understanding of what the facility looks like, what shape it's in, whether it's lighting, flooring, parking lot signage. Mark spoke about the need for understanding the linear feet and being exact in that planning piece. So we have our own W-2 surveyors and facility assessors that will go out in a very collaborative way. And again, it can be as simple as I need an as-built drawing. It could be as complex as I've got 1,000 sites and I've got a bucket of money to spend. I know what the return will be, but I don't know where to start. So we can come together and really create a customized survey or assessment and go out and grade anything and everything possible and make sure that you've got all the data that you ultimately need to make a decision. Then from there, we actually can put that data in a cohesive way that allows you to make decisions in hours and days, not weeks or months. So we really can cut that decision timeline down, have a pragmatic approach, and know where the return's going to come from based on where the spend is and demographic and everything else. Then from there, when it gets into idea creation, we can have concept planning, a full visualization, as well as any walkthroughs. So instead of getting on a plane and going to different concepts or looking at them, we can put those VR goggles on with some of the renderings and or virtual tours and walk through it as you are a customer with the different ideas and make changes on the fly and understand how that customer experience will ultimately change and create value or deter from the end game of what you want to create. Once we get that past that step, we really get into final plans and cost estimates. So understanding what it looks like, what the time frame of getting things done is, and then ultimately the output cost of what it's really going to take to make those ideas and thoughts come to fruition. Then we'll go out and select your contractors. We'll bid on your behalf. We also can be the general contractor. So if you've got an idea and you need a solution provider that has the capability or need to offer this on a large scale throughout the United States or even the UK, we can offer that to you. We can then permit it and then ultimately build it. So when I started this conversation with we work with a lot of large marquee style brands, but also we take a turnkey approach where we can take it from idea to ribbon cutting and really be that extension of your team. We mean that. And it's really our colleagues, our employees. We're somewhat control freaks because we know that we're only as good as the last individual that you interacted with. And you're trusting us to get to that end output as quick as possible, on time, on budget, value engineer where necessary, so you can maximize your return. And the return comes from additional sales, additional margin. So any delay deters that and degrades that. So we're heavily focused on ensuring that it comes through and it matches the idea and thought, ultimately the model put to place. So it's easy for me to talk about some of those things, but ultimately, we do have the capability and the stories to talk about where this has come to fruition. So 7-Eleven approached us quite some time ago about a 25-site remodel. Very successful firm, very successful operator. Had a new idea, new thought. So we helped them with that, just as I just described. And in that essence, we also created a playbook and documented the process and the ideas and the output and the decision trees to ensure that it was repeatable and replicatable in future renditions of whatever that may be. The cool thing from a results standpoint, it was on time, it was on budget, and future programs will operate in a similar method and manner because of that documented approach where now it can be repeatable instead of having to recreate and rethink those things over and over again, which ultimately create delays as well as increased cost. So a lot of questions so far around EV charging and a number of different things, and clearly Mark spoke about just EV charging in general, and clearly over the past year we've seen a surge in I want to install EV chargers, not only because of the infrastructure bill and the funding behind it, but also the demand from the customers and the end users that I need a place to charge my vehicle. And when you think about that, it's instant dwell time, and it's an instant opportunity to increase sales and be a destination, and ultimately just one more lever to attract some of that clientele. So Walgreens approached us with an idea around Volta, wanted to have a test or a pilot. Ultimately, they wanted us to manage it and ultimately turnkey it for them. So Volta entered the picture, EV chargers. We took it from soup to nuts of the survey, the design to the installation, and again, ultimately did it on time in a pilot, and there's future opportunities there to continue that forward. So I use those two last examples just as to really show that it's easy to talk about what we do, but with the clientele that we have and the opportunities that exist, we actually follow through with what we say we're going to do and create a really good output and ultimately value for our customers. So as I move to one of the last slides here, we like to think of ourselves again as an extension of your team, multiply the effects of what you do and how you do it, just to make sure that you can get there faster, which in my opinion is the definition of speed and scale. And the way we do that is through one point of contact, one whole solution. So you see these different levers on the slide here from, again, idea creation, understanding what exists, to design, full architecture engineering, civil engineering, value engineering, zoning, permitting, construction services, and we'll also be a developer in some cases. So if you need to find dirt, we can go do that and ultimately turnkey it all the way to fruition. I coined the term about a year ago, one throat to choke. Our chief operating officer reminded me that he would rather celebrate the win and not be a throat to choke, but more one back to pat, because we always get to the end game in a feasible manner and in a feasible way, and ultimately on time, on budget. And so we want to celebrate in those wins together. So instead of one throat to choke, we like to think of it now as more as one back to pat and ultimately move forward and help create that value and push those initiatives forward. So the thing that we ask and what we would cherish is some level of opportunity to serve you and ultimately your team and really give your next program the strength of 7. We only have 2 hands, but with the power of 7, you get 7 hands and can move faster, get there on time in an efficient and effective manner. So that's all I have for today. Again, thank you so much for the time. I know that we've got some questions, so I'm going to turn it back over to Mary Ann to see what's out there, and we can answer a few before we've got a break.
Thanks a lot, David. Yeah, let's now jump into the Q&A. Our first question: what's the most important thing to keep in mind when planning a C-store destination?
That's a great question. Mark, if it's all right, I'll take this one.
Yep.
So I think the first thing when I think about creating a destination is really understanding what the customer wants and needs based on the area that you're in, the demographic that you're looking to attract. And then from there, it's ultimately evaluating what footprint already exists, what that looks like, and then ultimately developing that plan to get there from a successful manner. And I would also say it's okay to say no. So in some of those cases, when you have an idea and you evaluate current situation, it may not be feasible to get there in the time frame. So you want some quick wins. You want to test it out. You want to see if the return exists, and then take some of the complexity further down the line. And then clearly, from a selfish manner, I would say it's very, very important you hire the right partner. And we would be honored to work with anybody to help them really take that idea, understand what exists, and develop that cohesive plan to get there in a feasible and effective manner.
Okay, here's another one. What are some of the biggest challenges clients face when working through a remodel?
Again, another great question, Mark. I'll take this one as well, and then I'll be quiet and let you talk again. I know you're chomping at the bit. So I think there's a couple of things here. I think we live in the world of supply chain disruptions today. It's almost the norm now, even though we all really want it to go away. So that will always be a challenge. And that's where that planning phase really comes in. It's very hard to be reactive and just say, hey, I want to do this now. I'm going to go get self-checkout kiosk or add some type of prepared food. It's just going to take a while to get the equipment, the labor, the things that ultimately have to come together for it to be a success. And then you add that to the disruption. So anytime that you're doing a remodel or rolling out a new initiative or adding things, there's always a disruption to the customer experience. And the last thing that anybody wants to do is upset that customer so they don't want to come back again. So it's important that we're thoughtful and really understanding of the time frame, the announcements, really starting with the why of why we're doing this, and then really celebrating that this is what's coming and this is how it's going to help you. And then last but not least, it's again hiring the right partner. We've seen a lot of our customers try to do some of these things on their own, and it just takes a really long time because of supply chain, and then ultimately disruption to their clientele really hurts their return. And so what I would really encourage everybody to focus on the planning, understand what really needs to exist for this to be a success, and then think about hiring the right partner to get there as fast as possible.
Okay, and here's a question that's right to the point. How can Sevan help me? Great
question. I was going to say good question, but great question. This is the question that I love it when potential clients ask us, Marianne, because it gives us the opportunity, I think, to respond in a thoughtful way. Look, I'd just come out and say in this space, we have folks at Sevan that have cumulatively hundreds of years of experience in the C-store fuel space, either working directly for some of the bigger and biggest and best names in the industry, to also working on our side, on the consultant side, they're wonderful, experienced folks that have provided just great solutions for clients over decades of work. So real subject matter expertise. My advice to somebody would be to say, first of all, leverage that and take advantage of that, and reach out to us if you want to share your thoughts, your thinking, what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you, where you've been challenged, and what you're thinking about doing on a go-forward basis. And let us, with all of that experience, talk about things that we've learned along the way, the do's and the don'ts, the things to be thinking about, the things to be careful and to be considerate of when they're making a decision. And then secondly, kind of when we get to kind of where the rubber meets the road in terms of if you are going to deploy some capital, Sevan is just a wonderful resource to reach out to that can provide as a partner kind of an end-to-end solution. We can start with what data do we have, what are we missing, what information are we lacking to be able to plan properly. We've got great space planners. We've got wonderful designers, great architects, engineers, have a lot of expertise throughout the United States in terms of any issues that relate to entitlement or due diligence or permitting. We have a network of partners that can install EV stations, that can do interior remodels, that can do all the things that we talked about today. So we like to think of ourselves as being able to provide a cradle to grave solution. David talked about having that one throat to choke, but at the end of the day, it's the trust and the assuredness to know that Sevan will be lockstep with you through the entire process, from the idea to the vision to putting the plan and the solution together and executing it all the way through to the very end. Please call us if you're thinking about anything in this space, anything we talked about today. Love to have a conversation and talk to you about our experience and hopefully provide some good insight that can help you on a go-forward basis.
Thanks, Mark. Here's another question. What is your definition of a successful C-store destination development?
The joy that we get in that, Marianne, from our perspective, is being able to see the vision and the idea that the operator has for their property, to see that come alive, and then to see them realize the fruits of that vision. We can't emphasize enough that we always come into these relationships trying to earn trust from the client, and then providing the best advice and the best solution, a world-class solution, and then delivering on that, and then seeing that vision come to life. There's nothing. It's why we're here. It's why we do what we do at Sevan.
Okay, and moving on, I know we've had a lot of questions about EV. Here's another one. What are the things you learned about EV charging initiatives that your current and future customers should keep in mind?
Mark, you should take this one?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, thanks. So EV is clearly a hot topic, and it continues to evolve. 24 months ago, it was just an idea. There was really a manufacturer, and they provided a charging unit, and there were a few others that were thinking about it, and it wasn't really a necessity or a need. And now with the infrastructure bill and the spend, and more importantly, more and more end users or customers, individuals buying electric vehicles, the need will continue to need to push forward to really displace some of the go-to resource of oil or other areas to power vehicles. So again, very, very evolving. I would also say that it's quite interesting. We work with a number of different entities in the UK, and they are much further ahead when it comes around electric vehicles and charging and infrastructure. And so the good thing about Sevan is we've got some of that knowledge and insight working across the pond, if you will, that we now can use to ensure that it's an efficient and effective rollout in the US. And again, I think it will continue to evolve. Technology is changing at a very, very fast pace, and supply chain constraints continue. You get a government that starts to say we're going to have funding in the billions, and a lot of people start buying chargers very, very quickly. And then ultimately that hurts downstream what you're able to do. So this goes back to that planning conversation of what type of customer are you trying to attract? Do you have the right environment and the ambiance and the experience where there's a natural dwell time, where there's something for that customer to do? And we can help you plan through those things to ensure that you've got the right charger, the right level, the right infrastructure, and your initiatives around dwell time and prepared food or QSR, et cetera, are available to ensure that you've got that true ROI of having an electric vehicle there, sitting at the charger, and then ultimately turning into cash at the register to ensure that you're getting that return or payback.
Another question here. What's the biggest ROI in the C-store space? Food, technology, or destination space?
Mark, you okay if I grab this one as well?
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. So I would not to be elusive, but I think it really depends. It's hard to say that one is more prevalent or more important than the other. It really depends on who you're attracting, what area you're in, and then using that data to make decisions. So we've seen large returns in all three of these for our different customers out there. I think the beauty of having a partner like Sevan is we can come in and ultimately help you analyze the data, really understand it, and instead of making an emotional decision of, hey, somebody else is doing this or we saw a trend around this, it's using that data to have a data-driven and a data-based conversation to ensure that it's the right customer at the right time, and ultimately it turns into a return.
Well, I think we have time for one final question. Where do you see the C-store industry headed in the next decade?
Well, Mark's got to take this one, or he'll get angry because he didn't get to speak last. So I'll let Mark take this one.
Okay, thanks, David. I love this question. I was going to interrupt you if you tried to take the lead on answering it. So I love this question. Yeah, our group that's dedicated in this C-store space spends a lot of time trying to understand industry trends and where things are going, so we can be relevant and have good, insightful recommendations in the industry. I came across an article that someone put on my desk recently within the last 2 weeks that I thought was really interesting, and I'm going to refer everybody to it. Parkland, which is a Canadian operator that has, I think, about 3,000 locations across 25 countries, is what I was told. Parkland commissioned a study, a contest, international contest, and it was all about what is this going to look like for a C-store operator 10 years out, kind of let's just really stretch ourselves and get out there 10 years and answer that question. And they had a competition. They announced a winner, and Fast Company magazine, if you Google Fast Company it was February of this year, has an article out there about this, about the winner of the competition and what the thoughts are around it. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that because of the evolving nature of the EV component of C-store and fuel is going to drive a lot of what this looks and feels like in the future. And they talk about, again, going back to, it's going to be more experiential because dwell times are going to be longer. And so people are going to have more opportunities while on your site for purchases, whether it's in food or in beverage or some of these other ancillary things like recreational spaces where people can gather, where they can plug in their equipment, recharge, where they've got fast Wi-Fi, where they can gather, where they can recreate and walk. And so great article, and it talks about where the trends are going, and they're all pointing in a very positive upward direction. And it's, as they said, it's for the brave right now to jump in with both feet right now, but something to pay close attention to because it's going to be significant and material, the changes that are going to take place. And for those people that are, the brave souls out there that want to jump in early, there's plenty of opportunity right now. But definitely changing, as David said, we're keeping a close eye on Europe because they are ahead of us. And we're watching what they're doing, and they're moving at a pace that's a year to 18, 24 months ahead of us. So providing really good insight on what this is going to look like. And a lot of what they're doing now in Europe is some of the things that they're talking about in that article. Fast Times from February 2022.
Thanks, Mark. I also want to thank both of our speakers for sharing their expertise with us today. And also thanks again to Sevan Multi-Site Solutions for sponsoring the webinar. And also a big thanks to our attendees for devoting the time to be with us here. One last thing, remember the webinar will shortly be available on demand, so you can listen to it again if there are things you want to check back on, and you can also share it with your colleagues. I think that's about it. Have a great day, everyone.